Enlightened Masculinity podcast streamed to IMC TV. And this is Wednesday, 9 a.m. Pacific time, 9:08, whatever. So many innovations and things. I mean, what direction do I take it in? Oh man, so many great things happening. If you don't know me, I'm captain of IMC Nation. That's the highest rank in IMC Nation under the founder. And there's reasons for that. It's because of a level of devotion, of commitment, of sacrificing all things that don't relate to the path. And when I see how I want to be, I've experienced many advanced teachers, all the way from academia to yoga and wrestling. And I mean, it may go over your heads or just kind of go through your brain and you doesn't process, like, what is it to wrestle with an Olympic champion? Like, what does that feel like? Like, if any of you wrestled me, it would just be unreal. There was a guy that was over the other day that he's big, like Russian Persian guy. One of our guys, he's like 25 years old, just a big guy. Wrestled for 1 year. I didn't know that. I found that out after. I was just kidding around with him, and he acted like he wanted to grapple in our living room, and we were about to, and I asked him if he'd ever done it before. I just backed down and turned away because it would just, like, I would have to risk injuring myself to go easy on him. By going easy on him, a big brute, that's what happens when you go with like a big guy. It's really injurious to go with a big guy who's not experienced and you're going easy on him because his weight and his momentum, and he'll he has strength. He's a big guy. But if I didn't go easy on him, it would just be pathetic. It doesn't matter how big he is. Like, I would just whoop his ass. And I've gone against Olympic champions that just whoop my ass. Maybe the difference isn't as big between me and that guy, an Olympic champion, and me. I don't know, actually. When I say that, I'm like, I don't know that I came close at all to ever scoring anything on them. Like, best I could do was like hold them off for a little bit. And it is like that in the academic world. Who I was studying under was the world's foremost expert in our discipline. He was the world champion of our discipline. And then what I'm doing now, what I did in the yoga community, who I studied with, it's up for debate, like who's the best and this or that. And maybe it's not even, people don't debate that sort of thing. But I think it's obvious by how my practice is now, after just being so casual with my practice. Like, I haven't, is this yours? Okay. Because I had one in my room too. I'm like, did I bring it? I don't think so. So it's just obvious in the practice room. I was practicing next to the previous, I don't know how many years ago it was, 3, 4, 5 years ago, world champion. Senior division women's world champion was next to me. It was just, it's so big thing. The teacher after the Bikram yesterday was like, because I do these, like, some of these kind of odd gestures, because I'm like, the Bikram sequence is kind of hard on just the way the practice is with the heat and the cueing and the nature of the postures. It would be easy to kind of fall into, how do I say it? Just overusing some muscles and not using other muscles, especially like deeper posture related muscles, especially parasympathetic. A lot of those muscles tend to be parasympathetic muscles. So, like, it's very difficult to activate subscapularis, or in some cases like glute medius, or even the diaphragm. Like, when you're suffocating and the heat is just, it stimulates a fight flight response. It's very hard to find those little muscles, but I do. And but one of the things that I do that I like to do, and whatever, it makes it interesting for me, and it feels better, like on my shoulder, because you're always doing the same kind of motion. There's not a lot of rotations, if any rotations, and there's no weight bearing on the arm. So the shoulder socket is just like something happens the way that the rotator cuff muscles all come together. I don't like it, just always raising my arms right up. So there's this posture where you just bring your arms up. It's like the second pose, and then you sit, and they call it awkward pose. And so I do this thing where I rotate my arms up and I activate serratus as I bring my arms forward. You can see them in the mirror. Like, I may not have a big chest muscle, but my serratus is like as big as my chest muscle, because I've like worked my serratus so much. So as I go up like this and my arms, like, it's just like, and I'm like, hell yeah. And I feel the tightness, and I feel the rotation. I'm like, oh, my shoulders, they're not only just like locked in, they are stabilized. Locked in isn't really the right word, because that makes it sound like it's fixed. It's actually not fixed. My shoulders become more healthfully mobile, because that's the kind of activation I would want to do a deep back bend, or some kind of hollow back or a scorpion pose or something. So the serratus makes that safely available, but the activation was locked in. I did that, blah, blah, blah. Class moves forward. After class, it's funny because Dan is here on the stream, and the teacher, I came out like 20, 30 minutes later because I stay in Shavasana forever. And she's there and she's like, Dan liked the class. And I was like, oh, it caught me off guard. I was like, oh, what? Because I'm tired. I just came out of hot yoga. I'm carrying my mat. The next class is lining up. I do this thing after class where, I mean, whether there's people in there or not, but I'm sure it looks weird when the people are in there and they're like flooding into the class. It's 6:20. So it's 10 minutes before the next class. And I get up and I'm holding my mat and my water bottles and I stare at myself in the mirror for like 20 seconds. And I like do some visualizations that I'm not going to talk about right now. So but it probably looks weird to everybody that I just stand up with my mat and I'm staring at the mirror. And so, but I'm in that mode and then I'm like in a tired trance and I walk out of the hot room and walk around the corner and she's right there talking to somebody. She's like, Dan liked the class. And I was like, huh? They're like, Dan, he liked the class. And I was like, oh, that's good. How do you know? You talked to him after? And she was like, yeah, he when he came out and he talked for a couple minutes before he went back. And I was like, man, I got to tell him he wasn't pushing hard enough if he's going to be a chatterbox as soon as he comes out of class. And she didn't, I don't think she really got the joke. But that's my humor after a 90-minute hot class. I'm basically telling her, stop talking to me. I don't want to talk to you, but not saying don't talk to me. I'm saying, man, he wasn't pushing hard enough if he wants to talk when he comes out. And then she was like, what's this thing that you do? And she's a more senior teacher, kind of a pretty lady, I was realizing yesterday, but she's probably like 55 or 60 at least, but like clearly works out a lot. And so she's like, what's this thing that you do? And I was going to say, because I thought she would get it, I could tell she has like fitness. She's bringing in fitness awareness to her Bikram teaching. And I was about to say serratus activation, this or that. I was going to try to impress her or whatever, but I let it go. And she doesn't even give it any pause. She just goes into saying something and she's like, I do that too. And then she goes into some criticism of like, you know, Dan was behind you and there was another new person behind you. And I could tell they didn't know like to do that or not. And I'm thinking, well, that's true. That's why I tell new people, don't look at me because I'm doing different things. Although I didn't have the chance to, or I didn't make it a priority to say that to Dan. I say that to every guy that comes. I'm like, don't watch me as an example because I'm going to do different things. You need to just look at other people. And I didn't say that to Dan. But then I asked her, I was like, and then she said something like to urge me to go into the back row. Like if you're going to do it, she's like, I do that stuff too, but don't do that if you're in the front row because people, you know, will see. And I was like, oh, did they do it wrong? Did they seem like they didn't know what to do? And she was like, no. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, you know, I'll move to the back row if it ever becomes a problem. I'm missing something in there where a few sentences earlier, somehow I said, Michelle never, who's the owner and the world champion. I was like, Michelle never corrects me. And she was practicing right next to me. I was practicing next to Michelle. Now, she would never correct me while practicing. She'll just take it. But I've practiced next to Michelle probably 5 times in the last 4 or 5 months. And I've also taken her class maybe 3 or 4 times that many times because she's on rotation of teaching. So probably like 10 or 15 times I've taken her class. She's never corrected me on that movement. And if she did, it would be very tricky to correct me on the movement because by the time the teacher has some correction to give, I'm already rotating my hands and I'm in the right position. So I'm just doing this kind of flowery movement that takes it like that. But then once I feel the activation and then I go right, I also have my hands spread, so which they tell you not to do. So I do this whole activation and then I'll close and turn over. So by the time the teacher makes a correction and the class looks, it's like, what are you correcting? And so I've never been corrected by any teacher. And she didn't correct me on the podium either. And I said to her, Michelle doesn't correct me. She lets me do it. And she was like, oh, she hasn't said anything. I was like, no. And then the teacher says something like, man, they used to be really strict with Bikram, this or that. And I was like, yeah, I don't know if it's that, or I just think that the teachers know that I'm just not going to listen. Like if they correct that. And I said that and I let that be heard by her. And I saw her process it. So it was really great. There were a few moments. I'm basically telling her I'm not talkative after class, although it's not exactly that. And it's not that I'm even not talkative after class. It was just, maybe I was picking up on this criticism vibe. I held back my tongue when she was asking me something almost in admiration, not jumping into it too fast, which was good because she wasn't really asking, what is this? She let it go. She didn't pause and wait for me to answer as if she was curious. She was, what is that? I do that too. Don't do that. Like, it's just such an obvious, what, did you read that in some parenting book for how to influence a kid? First, you admire them, then you create reality with them where you're doing it the same way in rapport, and then you tell them not to do it. And it's like, what are you doing? That's no. Man, I was just really impressed with myself. I know I'm not really transferring that, and I don't even know how that's related to things here. I was saying, huh?
I totally see what you're saying.
Yeah. You know, it encouraged me to go to the second row. I was like, I'll go to the second row if it's ever a problem. No teachers have ever said anything. Michelle didn't say anything. And then at the end, she's there. She totally is ignoring the guy that she's talking to. She's sitting, what we would call in game, the locked in position, because she's more comfortable than he is. And so he's standing there talking to her, and she's sitting there talking up to him. And she just like disregards him and is talking to me for like 2 minutes about this thing. And I feel something, and I'm just like, oh, thanks. And she does this, I don't remember what she said. If she said something, the face, what I'm remembering is like, you're welcome, but I don't know if she said you're welcome. But I could tell it was a little confusing because she doesn't know what I was saying thanks for. And the thanks I was giving was really it was almost giving thanks up into the moment. And it was a thanks for a good interaction, because it wasn't a negative interaction necessarily. She said her thing, I said my thing. We weren't in agreement, but she said her piece and I said my piece. And I didn't feel like I leaked any boundaries. I didn't have any vulnerability in my space. And maybe she didn't either. I think she's wrong, and she probably thinks I'm wrong. But it's like we ended on this respect where we were like kind of smiling at each other and said, thanks, you're welcome. I shook it off and I walked away, but I registered that she registered that I did not accept any correction she gave. That's why I think she was confused when I said thanks, because whatever she said, I didn't accept it. Thanks. And whatever she said, and then I just turned and walked. And then she kept talking to the other guy. And I don't know why I'm telling you all of that. So let's bring it back here. I was saying world champions, talking with some, Michelle measuring against the world champion, measuring against the people that practice there. You know, the champion of the recent competition was there. She was right behind me. And it's like, she's flexible. She's more flexible than me, but can't stay in Savasana, and, has to set out a bunch of poses. And so I had my speaker. That's a bad pacing of yourself. And, when I'm doing my home yoga practice, especially since I'm not so used to my vinyasa practice anymore, it's a different kind of blood circulation that happens when you're, pumping your blood through this breath movement system versus the blood being pumped through you by a rapid heart rate because of the heat. It's really the heat. It's just mild, not very difficult yoga poses, but done in extreme heat, and your heart is racing and your blood is flowing. And versus the vinyasa practice. So I would actually, if I did my vinyasa right now, would get winded. In like 10 or 15 minutes, I'd have to stop, catch my heart rate for 30 seconds or a minute, and then start again, because I'm not willing to do my practice in that kind of, I go to fighting. Like, that's going to spike my heart rate. I used to ride my bike to and from Bikram, a 9-mile round trip. It's hard to ride your bike 4.5 miles right after a Bikram class. And I had to hurry and get home to set up for a stream. Like, I can experience a spiked heart rate if I want to. I don't want that in my vinyasa practice, in my personal yoga practice, because I have realized much better benefits by not doing that. Because on occasion, maybe I've been too exhausted to push to that level, and then I realized the benefits after. Or back in the day, I was in such good condition that I could go through the vinyasa and not get winded. Like, if I did that, I'd get winded on 10 or 15th minute. Do it again 2 days in a row, that would be like the 15th to 18th minute. Do it a third day in a row, and it'll be a little delayed. Pretty soon I'll be doing a 45-minute practice without getting winded, and then I'll be adding on to it. Eventually I'll get that winded stage. And I just keep pushing that, and I'm familiar with how all of that compression and muscular effort, you come out of a pose, and if you've done like 40 or 50 poses, your muscles are craving oxygen. They're like sipping for air. And meanwhile, you're controlling your breath at a regulation, and your body is like suffocating for air, but you are in control. And, that may catch up to you in the form of like a headache, or just like lethargy, like you'll start yawning or getting tired in the middle of your practice. Maybe stop and catch your breath. And it's just, so all that practice, being around top world-class people, I see what world-class is. or I have in many areas. And what we do is world class. What my teacher does, it's world class. Like there's just no doubt about it. And I see it, and people compare me to him and compare some of the other guys to him. And that's flattering. That's like, you know, comparing to a world champion in wrestling. Like I was hella good at wrestling, and I'm going to keep going in this thing. I've been longer in this endeavor than I was. Well, no, it's about the same. I was in wrestling for 8 years, and it's almost the same actually when I look at it, because in wrestling, I started wrestling freshman year. So I didn't make the soccer team. I thought I was good enough. I met all of the requirements, and I was better than a lot of guys because they had like how much you juggle, how fast you run 2 miles. Juggle is like kicking a soccer ball up, you know, left foot proficiency, right foot proficiency. You know, I met all those requirements. I wasn't such a good team player because I was hella awkward back then, and I wasn't really friends with any of the guys trying out. And my dad was not liked by the coach, and maybe those are the reasons why I didn't make the team, or maybe I just wasn't good enough. I don't know. I don't want to be like a victim about it, but I didn't make the team. So I sulked for a day or two because soccer was my life. Soccer and Boy Scouts was my life up until then. And so then I decided, for whatever reason, I forget, maybe I had met the team captain or whatever, decided I'd go join the cross country team. So I started running. You know, that's a whole success story too, because we were terrible, we became state champions. But then the fall season's over, winter season starts, that's wrestling. I decided I'm going to wrestle. There's a picture that's in my room with me and my dad. I'm wrestling and he's wrestling. And I had seen that picture when I was younger. He had shown me that picture. And so for some reason I admired my dad for wrestling. And I thought, I'm going to wrestle. So I started, and I was really bad, like the worst on a really bad team. And you think I'm exaggerating. I don't think so. So I got my butt whooped all season. I even got hurt right at the beginning. So I had to sit out for a lot of it, just watch, because I broke a bone. And after season was over, you know, I was running, I started track, made sense because of cross country, but there was like something called like postseason, like clubs, like club wrestling. And so guys would just get together, you know, coaches would be involved. They'd be at different high schools, and it was not official, like Liberty High School was my high school or Westminster High School. It wasn't part of those high schools. It was just like club wrestling that took place on those high schools because they had all the mats. It's very expensive to have like a wrestling mats, and relative to other sports that you just need like a baseball and a bat, or like a soccer ball. That's the sport. You need some wrestling mats, or you're not going to be wrestling for very long. And so for some reason, I had some urge to do club wrestling, which was the beginning of me getting hella committed to wrestling. The first freshman season, I wasn't hella committed. I was getting bloody noses every day, and I was sitting out for a lot of it. And I was junior varsity and had a really bad record. And for some reason, like a few weeks after wrestling was done, I was like, I got to wrestle. Like there was just something about it. I was also, you know, I've had laser eye surgery. So at the time, you have to take off your glasses. Didn't see so well. And so there was something, and that was always like a handicap in soccer or any ball sport. You could wear goggles or whatever, but then they fog up. And it's just like, it was difficult. But with wrestling, because there was so much tactile with it, I don't know. I feel like maybe there was something with that where it's like I could feel where my opponent was. And there was something, some other senses were engaged that I didn't need to see so well to be good at it. And I don't know if that's what it was. I didn't ever analyze it like that back then. But looking back, I think that played a role with it. I don't know, something about the pain and getting beat up, but also having some leverage to beat someone else up, learning the technique. It was a martial art. It's the American martial art is what wrestling is. And even though it's ancient Greek sport, it's Americans that like made it, you know, this huge thing for the world. And I really specialized it. We have our own style of wrestling that they don't do in the rest of the world, but it gives us a certain advantage because other places in the world don't have top wrestling. They don't do top and bottom. They have something like top wrestling, but the referee brings them back up to their feet to do takedowns after like 10 or 15 seconds. Versus American wrestling is you hold them down and you try to pin them and you work and warp their joints and manipulate them. A lot, very similar. It's like a bridge between jiu-jitsu and Olympic style wrestling. American wrestling, somewhere like kind of in between. And so for some reason, postseason, I was just like, Dad, I want to do some club wrestling. I don't know how I heard about it. And we started doing it. And then I was doing club wrestling while I was doing track. It was like 3-4 days a week. I would go to different clubs and I did maybe some off-season tournaments. Again, I sucked. Like I was getting my butt whooped, maybe win a match here or there. But for some reason I was hooked and I did summer camps. I was dedicated. So that's what happened with IMC. Like I started studying some lectures. I was like, this makes sense, which you have to have some tremendous intelligence to make it make sense, because it is advanced. It's like learning chess strategy, this kind of lifestyle and game strategy. It is chess, but you got to see many moves ahead and see, why are you doing that? Otherwise, you're just parroting or mimicking a move and you don't know why, and you're going to get yourself in trouble. If you do some chess moves because somebody says that's a good move, do that, and you're just like, oh yeah, that's a good move, and you do that, you're going to get yourself in trouble if you don't know the next move. You're going to keep needing advice, but you get the strategy and you suck at it for a while, but then you start, oh, I see where they're setting me up, or I set them up. I see where they think they have the advantage, but I put my horse here and my knight and bishop there or whatever, and the person thinks they have an advantage. They do something and it's so obvious, and then I get it. And so with wrestling, I was hella dedicated for like 7.5 years. So I did 8 years, but then it took that first half a year where I was just like dabbling in it, and then it hooked. Now, the difference is at the end, the last 1.5 or 2 years of wrestling, I mean, I was getting into drugs. I'd lost ambition. I was cutting too much weight, and it was just kind of miserable. And then afterwards, I realized like the errors of my ways and whatever. I mean, even now, I just like fucking smashed my nose. I got hit and it like bent over and I had to pop it back over. And I'm like, man, I'm sure I have damage everywhere. My rib, that's a wrestling damage. I have damage in my body that, if I'd kept going with wrestling, probably more damage. That's how I think of things. Like if ever I'm late or I'm driving and like anything happens, even if I got a flat tire, if a tire blew, I would be thankful that I just avoided that fatal car accident that I was going to get in because my tire blew. Like, that's just how I frame it for myself. Anytime bad shit happens, I'm like, man, I probably avoided some worse shit by that happening. That was intervention, divine intervention. So all that shit that I had a falling out with wrestling, I mean, that's what made me get my master's and my PhD and travel to Italy and travel to India and get into yoga and move to San Jose and start IMZ. I don't know that any of this would have happened. And where I'm at right now is winning so well because of the advantage that I have in my lifestyle philosophy over other men. They're lost. They're glossy-eyed. They're in a fog. They're dazed. Even the guys at jiu-jitsu, one of the guys was messaging me after jiu-jitsu, talking about some things, and he's using this language and this phrasing that's like semi-intelligent. And why I say that is because it is intelligent, but it's not intelligent to speak overly intelligent to people who don't get what you're saying. That's unintelligent. It's like when you're so smart that you're talking over someone's head and then you're getting frustrated that they don't get it. How smart are you? It'd be smarter to dumb down your language. That's actually smarter. It's ego that's making you talk so intelligently that so the person doesn't get it. And ego diminishes our intuition and some genius capacity that we have in us. Like one of my yoga teachers, David, would talk about, the soul or the seer within is genius. It is genius. And it's I forget how he says this, so I'm just going to say it in my own words. It's the personality and the ego that gets caked over our true self that diminishes, our light, diminishes our intelligence. So guys with their what was I saying? And I just see that fog that they're in, and it's not that they're not capable like me. I was once a skinny, unable to defend myself boy that didn't know wrestling, and I learned it through the hard knocks and the pain and a lot of losses and eventually some wins and becoming team captain. And I do it for 8 years, and it's kind of matching. So IMC, I study some lectures and I'm like, man, this makes sense. Some great analogies like if you were walking around with $10 million in your bank account and, $1,000 in your wallet, and everybody knew you were loaded and rich, like they just knew you had that much money. They would, the way they talk to you may kind of ask for handouts or feel entitled, or like when you go out to eat, they just kind of expect you to pay. Or and I know this because I live with Brian Cassell and he had a bunch of money, and I saw that urges in me, and I would start feeling entitled with his money because I was so used to him paying for shit. And I just saw 2 or 3 times that happen, and it's like, man, no more. Like, so the man, he's so wealthy and he can tell, he'll be able to get a sense for when people are approaching him, knowing he's rich, versus it'll seem so out of the ordinary when someone approaches him almost like ignorant of his money. And at some point, if the person doesn't seem to acknowledge that he's so wealthy, he may flaunt his money a little bit. He may take out his wallet with a fat wad just to like fiddle with something and then put it back in, just to see, make sure that the person knows, like, I'm wealthy, right? He may fiddle with his watch or, his vehicle, or there'll be something. Now, he may not if he has, supreme character, but most people, let's say a wealthy man who's used to people approaching him for his wealth, has shields and boundaries up and can see that same old game where someone's approaching him with like the money in their mind. But then something will be out of the ordinary where that 1 in 1,000 person approaches and doesn't seem to acknowledge that they're so rich. And he'll almost try to like show it. And there'll be some kind of trust or rapport built if the person still isn't reacting to the money. Like, that's a fat wad. And then just moves on with something. Living, look at that tree. Isn't that a pretty flower? Okay, that's what happens to the girl who looks good. The girl who looks good is approached, and she gets a sense after so long that the guy is looking at her a certain way when he approaches, no matter what he's saying. Nice shoes. Do you know where the nearest Starbucks is? Like, it's a nice day out. Do you know what time it is? Like, when she was 14, maybe she didn't get it. When she was 15, maybe she didn't get it. You know what I mean? That's the guy with money, because guys aren't born with that kind of value. Women are born with that kind of value. It's a blessing and a curse because that kind of value goes down later in different. It's like opposite of men. So it's whatever. We're different. And so we learn to navigate with each other. Look at that. That is an unconscious movement, what that was. You know what that means? And I like it. I like that unconscious movement. You know what I mean? I was talking to you about attraction is not a choice. Yes. Just like that. Did you do that intentionally?
It was an itch.
That's the exact thing that we were talking about. Attraction is not a choice. So when you can, it's more obvious maybe for me as a guy, but maybe just in general because of the way guys are. When guys are attracted, it's obvious. Like they gawk, and what they're attracted to, it's more. Maybe that's what it is. What the guys are attracted to is more obvious.
The scratch shows the attraction.
Yes.
Oh.
Because you were for 35 minutes or 40 minutes we've been here. How many scratches do you think you've done?
None.
Exactly. Did the itch just come out of nowhere? Why? Why did the shoulder area itch? Did a bug come? Did a breeze come? Did what touched it? Why the itch? Because the itch, sometimes it comes from the outside, but we can also create an itch from inside. We can have a psychosomatic experience, and that's what that was. Or that's how I choose to interpret it. I'm not going to describe what just was, but you saw that. But I can talk about the itch. You know what I mean? So attraction is not a choice. And what am I saying? So women attraction, somehow, the woman gets approached and so that's part of our game. That is the game that we have is, yes, you talk with women, but just know that she's going to be able to smell. I was going to say scent. A bunch of words got confused. Sense when you're hitting on her. And it's not going to be directly saying you're so beautiful, hitting on her. There's a vibe of you're looking at her like you want her when you're interacting with her, saying whatever bullshit you're saying. And that is hitting on her. And it takes a lot of introspection, character evaluation, and retraining your patterns, just like if you're going to retrain your muscle patterns. It takes a lot of retraining these psychological reflexes, because how you've been raised through all of media, chasing the girl, how you've been raised through all of upbringing of school. You probably weren't getting a lot of girls growing up in school, and girls develop sooner, and you're around all these female teachers telling you what to do, but they're not your mom and they have these big breasts. And it's like you have this attraction, but you don't know what to do. They teach you family and consumer sciences, but they don't teach you about game. They teach you about recess, but they don't teach you about game. They teach you about mathematics and things, a bunch of bullshit that you don't need to know. You need to know math, but a bunch of shit that you don't need to know, but they don't teach you female psychology, male psychology, interrelationships, and how to do this thing. Because, I mean, come on, the school says it's a sad, sad joke. So there's a strategy. So I dove into it half a year. I was listening to the lectures, and I remember that was one of the talking points, was this analogy between money and replication value, survival value, and replication value, and how to approach. And it made so much sense. And I had already studied a little bit of game. The idea of an indirect approach in the mystery method was like a thing, was like, don't approach her directly because women of beauty are used to that. And she's not going to give you the time of day to convey your personality if you just approach directly. You got to be indirect so that you have more time to convey personality, because that's what's going to get the girl. not your dick or your symmetry or your money. I mean, that'll get you some kinds of women, but it's not, you don't get the woman. You just kind of buy the woman with that. And then she goes because there's no loyalty with that. When you demonstrate supreme character to a woman and that's what you use to get her, that's a thing she can't get elsewhere. She can get $1 million elsewhere. There's guys with money, but can she get a man with character? She's got it, but man, she's got a fog too. It's not just guys in a fog. She's in a fog. She doesn't even know how to recognize character. She may know if she feels good around the guy, but a lot of girls don't even know how to measure when they feel good. If alcohol is not involved, they don't even know if it feels good. They know alcohol feels good. They're numb. Men are numb too. Everybody's numb. They're brainwashed. So I go into this IMC 6 months. I'm like, man, this stuff makes sense. I'm watching lectures. I'm listening, really. I'm not watching. And because I'm walking my dog while I'm listening to these things. Amazing, really. When I look back on it, like how old I was, 28, walking around in Florida. I remember the fog and the rain and walking my pit bull. Bless her little heart. She's gone now. And listening to these lectures over and over. And finally, I decide to fly to San Jose for a one-on-one. And that was kind of like, finally, after the wrestling season, hey, I want to do some club wrestling. And I'm seeing how it's related. And I just dove in from there. And it was like there was no stopping me. And even though it was interesting in high school, my high school coach didn't believe in me for the first, the second year either. He didn't believe in me until my junior year. And that is, whatever it is. I forgive him for that, whatever. I'm sure I don't remember how I was. I'm sure I was very difficult to coach, difficult to handle. A lot of my teammates didn't like me. And I'm sure my dad was not very likable. That's why my dad's a great guy. He's not the most likable guy. In fact, he's just unlikable when you get to know him a lot, unless you're of a certain breed of character. But he's a really good man. Really better than other men. I know because I'm better than other men. And it's because of him. I know this because it comes out in how I am. He was raised in a certain upbringing and in the military and whatever, and didn't have to socially win people over to succeed. I didn't want that because it was dissatisfying in the game of relationships, because that would be you succeed not by people liking you, but by being cutthroat and dog eat dog and whatever. And you'll get a woman, but you won't really get her. You'll just get a woman because you're successful, and a woman needs a successful man. You're not really going to get her. It's going to be the kind of relationship that you get with her, and then she goes downhill after she gets with you. She gets fat. She stops taking care of herself. She stops wearing makeup. She stops appreciating you. She starts nagging you. It's that kind of, you got her. You didn't really get her. You know what I mean? So you're still laughing about my dad being unlikable? Or?
No, that was just so savage.
Oh, yeah. All right. So clip that out, Johnny Ranger. It was savage. All right. It's clipping these for the game, posting everywhere. So I need to wrap this up real fast. Wrapping this up, dove into it, being cool, whatever, dad, likable. Anyway, my stay in IMC is almost at 8 years, which is how long I wrestled. But the last 2 years of wrestling, I was really falling out of love with I had fallen out of, and I still love wrestling, actually. I don't know that I ever fell out of love with wrestling. It was just, there were so many obstacles in the way, internal and external, with my coaching and whatever, which may have been more internal. But me at the age of 20 or 21, dealing with, 55-year-old senior coach, like, he's got so much more experience in life. And like, there's nothing I could have done there's no way I could put my wisdom now into a 20-year-old body and handle that situation. So there were external problems, internal problems, and I ended up stopping wrestling. I'm approaching about 8 years now. No, I have. Oh, it is the same. Yeah, it was about February of 2015. So it's been 8 years, a little over 8 years I've been in IMC, and I'm still going strong. And I'm team captain, and we're going up. And I'm organizing. I'm so interconnected with so many of the guys. And that was lifetimes ago wrestling. After wrestling, I went through a drug lifetime, which means what? All of my wrestling circle of friends, no more. Now a new circle of friends, druggies and musicians, with a couple of wrestling buddies that became druggies and musicians. Then I leave that whole lifetime behind, and I'm still getting a master's degree, but I leave that and go to a PhD, where I leave all of those people and new friends. Not friends like I have now, but I mean, guys I would go to a bar with or go to salsa with. Maybe I get a girl to go to yoga with me from my office, or I'd go into the field and do ecology with them because they had experiments. And, we'd have group meetings. Like, it was a whole different circle of people. Just left them. Didn't interact with the druggies anymore. Didn't interact with the wrestlers anymore. Never mind high school, left that whole lifetime behind, went across the country to just form new friends. It was lifetime, 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 PhD lifetime, now yoga lifetime. And it's all different friends. Are you like raising your hand? No.
I'm doing the time.
Yeah, it's all different friends. The yoga spiritual people, there was some overlap with the PhD, but I left the PhD behind, go to India, make new friends, come back, forget the PhD people. Still had a girlfriend, Angelica, which was not really, she was more of a yoga friend than a PhD friend because I met her through yoga. She knew about my PhD and I would talk about it, but like that was not the circle. There was the PhD circle and the yoga circle. And a whole new circle of people, just totally different. Meanwhile, I'm studying IMC while I'm doing that. I had already been in IMC when I went to India, but there were not friendships in IMC. I was friends with Brian and there were one other guy, fucking whatever, but he's a dropout now. I forget his name. And there were not connections with IMC. Like right now, there's guys on IMC. One of them is living at Base 1 right now for a week, just residency. These guys, like I've met them in person, and this is a small fraction of the people that I've met in person. At the time, there was not that interconnectedness. It was my yoga friends, and then, you know, my IMC teacher and my one IMC friend. And over time, I've left that behind. It's still there, just like there are wrestlers. If I go on my Facebook now and watch my story, I'll point out like 3 or 4 wrestlers from high school and college that still watch my stories regularly. They're there. I DM them sometimes just to say what's up. I encourage them down the straight line of enlightenment here, and they don't bite. I'm not really pushing it. Some people I push because I just don't like them and they either need to buy or get lost. But other people, it's like, whatever, dude, like keep watching. Eventually you come around. I don't need to push it now. The flower will sprout and bloom when it fucking sprouts and blooms. And, you know, so the yoga YouTube is still there. Occasionally somebody buys something. I post a promo on it sometimes, but I've left all those yoga people behind and just cleans through it. I'm in another lifetime. So that's like 1, 2, 3. Wait, 1, 2, 3, 4. This is like my 5th lifetime in this lifetime. Never mind, like, you know, growing up, Boy Scouts was my thing. I did a lot of soccer, but Boy Scouts were all my friends. That's what I did. And I left that for wrestling and created a wrestling family. Created it because we sucked as a freshman and I was state champion, but I made the team really good. And so here I am in IMC, 8 years, going strong, creating everything. I titled this episode Non-Neediness. I didn't even get to non-neediness. I mean, I kind of touched on it with like approach a woman not needing anything. And then there's ways to do that. There are canned ways to do that, which are like scripts for how to approach. Those are like openers, like things to say. I'm not very good at those. I have done them. Like it's better for like nightclubs and whatever, because there's a lot of people. And so if it messes up one, you just roll off to the next one. When I was in Vegas, I was always saying, hey, quick question. I got to get going. But tattoos, face tattoos on a girl. Yes or no? That was my opener. No. You say no? You don't seem interested. Well, the reason I'm asking is, and that's how I would approach a set if 2 girls were like that. And one was like just stoic looking.
Totally not interested.
Totally not. If I approached you, you see, but see, then the smile would come out and see there's good feelings right there. What I'm saying is not for the purpose of what I'm talking about. It's just for the purpose of saying something. It's a plausible reason for us to get into conversation so that I can demonstrate character. I can tell a story about my niece or whatever. You can get some values of mine. That's how I got to anchor it somehow. Or my little sister, so like my sister's 17 and she's about to turn 18 and get a tattoo of her boyfriend's name on her fucking face. How fucked up is that?
You make it sound so real.
Yeah, exactly. That's acting. Totally believe you. That's what game is.
You're like, no way.
I know, but she won't listen to me because I'm her older brother. And the more I tell her not to, the more she's going to do it. What should I do? You know what I mean? So I would just move on at that point. I'd milk the opener too long, but that's a strategy of indirect or just other basic strategies that how do you say, hi, what's the time? How's the weather? It's a nice day out without hitting on her. Just, you could say all those things. Nice shoes, which is a weird thing to say to a girl unless you're like a shoe connoisseur. But like, you know, just how can you talk casually without having that energy of hitting on her, that indirect energy? So that's a non-neediness. And that needs to stay throughout the relationship and beyond, throughout seduction. Like you don't need sex from her. And if she gets that you need sex from her, she loses attraction. If she gets that you need her support, you need her admiration, you need her to cook for you, clean for you, you need her. See, it's interesting because people like to be needed. And I'll need you to do that because I'm relying on you to do that. But I'm not needy for you to do that. So there's a difference between needing and neediness. It's interesting. Maybe it's a semantic thing. The English language maybe is not refined enough to give the distinction, but you got it. You got it. I saw you shake. So I think you guys get it. So it's okay to need people to help them feel needed, because people like to feel needed, but not be needy for them, which is a kind of it's a taking. It's a clinginess. It's an attachment that's not attractive. And, that's what's needed in the courtship, throughout the courtship and the relationship, which is beyond courtship, beyond sex. And that's what's needed in business. It's just what's needed, non-neediness. But that comes from knowing right strategy and having a sense of self-fulfillment. It's not enough to just have one or the other. If you have the strategy but not self-fulfillment, then you're still going to be pretending to not be needy. And you're going to falter. It's going to leak out. And it's going to destroy what you've created by being non-needy. And if you just are self-fulfilled, but you still don't have strategy, then you're still going to be going off of the patterns of the people around you. How did you learn how to communicate? So it's still you're going to be frustrated. And that's what spiritual people, they're frustrated, even though they may be clean inside. And so they have to leave society to go practice spirituality because they don't know how to interact. They don't have the strategy. And then the strategists are having existential crises because they don't have that, how to feed themselves. Like I was saying in my promo clip for Enlightened Masculinity this morning, a nighttime process to process your thoughts and feelings so that you can wake up more rested and immediately be in gratitude for being awake. That's a strategy of life. That's a way to give yourself that fulfilling love, that self-love. It is a little bit of telling myself I love myself and finding all the things I appreciate about myself, but it is like actions are louder than words. It is more self-love by taking care of yourself, by resting, by doing the things you need to do. It's not so much telling yourself you love yourself and finding all the things you love about yourself. It is expressed in how you live. Do you love yourself? Like when I talked to the yoga teacher yesterday and I basically said, I'm not going to move unless it's an issue. Even though she's encouraging me to move back a row, so I'm not in the front row. I'll move when it's an issue. That's me loving myself. I wanted to be in the front row to see myself. Some days I choose the second row because I want to see more inwards than outwards when I practice. I want to find my balance, not looking in the mirror. Because if I was to walk into the jungle or the forest to meet my maker at the end of my life, my yoga is going to be with myself, not in a mirror. I've overtalked, probably said too much. Are there any burning thoughts or final things or anything unresolved? While you think of it, just if you're watching the recording, leave a review on all the podcast platforms and subscribe and all that stuff. Okay, so there's nothing left. All right, thank you everybody for attending. This was Enlightened Masculinity on IMC TV. Jay Guru Dev. Os.